This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and I'm finally getting to my ranking of all the D&D 5e classes. Now, if you like what I do, even a little bit, please consider liking and subscribing. It would help me a lot. Now, why am I ranking the classes? Well, partly for fun. And considering how many people rank the classes and how much attention those rankings get, apparently a lot of people think it's fun. But more than that, it gives me a chance to talk about all the classes and their relationship to each other. Because for a player, it doesn't matter where a class fits into my ranking, but rather why it fits there. See, comparing the classes begs the question, does it make sense to compare these things? If you say a wizard is better than a fighter, you need to follow that with, in what way? How is a wizard better? A majority of lists are either a matter of what that particular person likes, which is fine, though not useful, or which class is best at beating up the other classes, which is reasonable if you play in a free-for-all where the player characters are trying to kill each other, but that doesn't happen very often. When I say that a class is better than another class, I mean it is better at something. And that means I'm comparing their jobs. More jobs tend to mean a better class. But more important is how good a class is at the job it has. It doesn't matter if a class isn't any good at a job it doesn't do. Some other class will handle that. The best classes have multiple roles they can fulfill and are really good in at least one of those. So for each class, I'll be indicating which jobs it can handle and which of those it's really good at. Additionally, I'll include a few other factors that affect multiple roles, such as if a class is fragile. It's hard to be good at a job if you're dead. While I will touch on what I mean by character roles, most of that is in another video. So if what I'm saying isn't clear to you or doesn't immediately fit in with how you think a role is in the game, take a look at that video. Now, I'm not going to be going through the classes from weakest to strongest or strongest to weakest, but instead from the oldest class to newest, and then fitting them into their place in the ranking as I go along. So I'll start with one of the 3 original classes, although back then it was called the Magic User, now it's the Wizard. And jumping right into its jobs, Striker. No. Consistent single target damage isn't the Wizard's thing. Spamming a cantrip isn't good enough. Sure, he can on occasion do a great deal of single target damage with a high level spell, but a sudden burst does not make a Striker. Tank? Oh no. No class has fewer armor proficiencies or smaller hit dice. We're far past not being a good tank. The wizard is fragile, surviving at low level due to the kindness of the party healer and tank. How about control? Well, here we go. The wizard is the master of controlling the battlefield. He does this through his spells, not features. Sleep, Web, Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Slow, Fireball, Ice Storm, Wall of Force and Stone, Mass Suggestion, Force Cage, Maze. No single spell list has more control spells than the wizard's, and as the wizard can swap spells after a long rest, he's always going to have the right spell for the job. He not only can take on this role, he's the absolute best at it. How about buffing? Well, as for buffing, again, it is the spells that matter, and the wizard has a lot of excellent buffing spells. Gift of Alacrity, Dark Vision, Invisibility, Flight, Haste, Greater Invisibility, Polymorph, all the way up to 9th level Foresight. And that ability to swap out spells is even more important for buffing, always having on hand what you need. Now, a majority of the wizard buffing spells are single target, which isn't ideal. And again, the wizard's ability to fulfill this role is based on spells. More importantly, concentration spells. Same as for control. So while a single wizard can be built to be both the party controller and the party buffer, he can't carry out both these roles simultaneously. He can switch in the middle of a battle, but at any one moment, he's acting either as a controller or as a buffer, not both. Healer? No, the wizard is famously not a healer. It's the one kind of spell not on his list. How about for out of combat? The Scout. I covered 5e scouting in my roles video, but in brief, skills can't compete with magic, and a wizard has the spells that count. Invisibility, Fly, multiple teleports, a full range of divination spells all make him a better scout than a rogue or ranger, but none of those spells even make the grade. It's all about familiars. Wizards use drones, peering through camera-like eyes to see what's ahead or to listen in. No sneaking rogue is going to go as unnoticed as a spider or a cat, or travel as easily as an owl, or be able to be pulled back instantly. Yes, a wizard has this one. How about Burglar? Nope, he lacks the proficiency in Thieves' Tools, is unlikely to have a high dex, and is surprisingly weak at buffing skill checks. As for face, well, he's got a few spells, Cause Fear, Charm Person, but that's at best a stopgap. With no charisma skills on his list and charisma being a likely dump stat, face is no place for a wizard. Now, Scholar seems more up his alley. He has the intelligence, and has 4 of the 5 intelligence skills on his list, missing only nature. But he only has 2 skill picks, and again, little to buff his skill rolls. So the wizard makes a surprisingly weak Scholar. I suppose he can fill the role, though not spectacularly. Finally, there's Utility Caster. If you want to find or identify something, communicate, travel, or have a safe rest, the wizard is your boy. Alarm, Detect Magic, Comprehend Language, Identify, Unseen Servant, Continual Flame, Robe Trick, Leomund's Tiny Hut, Phantom Steed, Tongue, water breathing, Mordenkainen's Faithful Hound, and more. And many vital spells are rituals that the wizard can cast without even preparing them. Other classes will stray into this area, but have huge gaps. The wizard is the only class that really does this job well, and it becomes the second role that he's the best at. This gives our wizard 2 possible roles in combat, where he's the very best at one of them, and 3 possible roles out of combat, where again he is the very best at one of them. This is impressive, though with the minor mitigating factor that he can't execute being a controller and a buffer simultaneously, meaning that while he can fill those roles, in practice he'll only be doing one and someone else will need to be around to do the other. Other factors? There's that mentioned fragility, and one other. The wizard's so good with control, buffing, and utility because he can access so many spells due to his large spell list, prepared spellcasting, and his form of ritual casting. But this includes an assumption that the wizard can actually get all those spells into his spellbook. Following the implications of the game, including the commonality of spell scrolls and a world filled with wizards, it's a reasonable assumption. And that's how I've seen most games played, with easy access to spells. But it doesn't have to be. Clerics have full access to their spell lists. Wizards technically do not. They are only assured of getting access to 6 first level spells, and then 2 additional spells per level. That's 44, which is a lot. Far more than any other arcane caster, but not as much more as I was previously implying. A wizard who can't find other spells to copy along the way may not always have the right spell for every situation. That's not much of a factor in my ranking of the class, but if in your game scrolls are hard to come by, you might downgrade the wizard a touch. So a wizard can do multiple jobs in and out of combat, and with 2 he's number 1, making the wizard an S-tier class and one of the best the game has to offer. And I'll start off by placing him at the top. Moving on to one of the other 3 of the original classes, the Cleric. So he's a striker. The Cleric does damage, but can't compete with the heavy hitters. Again, spamming a cantrip isn't enough, even with the help of Spiritual Weapon. And for weapons, he doesn't have the options for increasing weapon damage that others do, nor does he get extra attack. And to cap it all, Wisdom is the Cleric's primary stat, which means he's fighting with a lower ability score, meaning less damage and fewer hits. How about Tank? He's got no features that help here. A D8 hit die isn't bad, but it isn't good either. Not for a frontliner. Medium armor and shield are great for a backliner. For a frontliner, things get complicated. If he's going to tank, he needs a high con and a 14 dex for the +2 mod to AC. And if he's in the front line, he's likely going to want to fight with weapons, which means a high strength, and he can't do all of that. Not with normal methods of generating stats. Sticking with spells would help, but without something more, he comes out as a really survivable backliner. And okay in melee, but not the guy to be the sole focus of the enemy. I'd end it here with a close but not close enough, except for dodging. Dodging doesn't encourage enemies to attack, thus the opposite of tanking, but does make the character far less death prone if attacked. Normally I wouldn't count dodging in because then the character isn't doing anything else, and no one wants that. But a Cleric gets Spiritual Weapon early, meaning he still can be active each turn while he dodges, and then later he picks up Spirit Guardians, where he can be a deadly killing machine while dodging. I still won't give the role to the Cleric, but he makes a solid secondary, and Tank is one of those roles where you actually want a secondary, letting the primary tank absorb the worst of it, but standing in the way of anyone who gets past the primary. And for that, he's quite good. About control? Nope. Again, it's just spells, and the Cleric doesn't have a lot. Bane Silence and a few single target spells. For Fatal Crowd Control, there's a few weak spells a wizard wouldn't deign to copy if he could, like Flame Strike, and a couple really high level ones. The exception is Spirit Guardians, but one great crowd control spell does not a controller make. How about Buffer? Once again, it's not features, but spells. The Cleric is known for its buffing ability, and that was half of what made the Cleric a leader in 4E, so it's surprising to see how mediocre to weak the Cleric's offerings are above first level. There's Holy Order at 8th, then just a couple decent spells that are either single target or too expensive in one way or another to cast often. Just wouldn't be enough for the role, except I said above level 1. Cantrips and level 1 spells are exceptional. While I'm hesitant to say that one level of Cleric is enough for the job, it comes really close. Let's start with Guidance, arguably the best cantrip in the game. So many failed skill rolls will succeed with this around. There's also Resistance, which is better than it's given credit for, though not in Guidance's league. And then at first level, there's a few useful buffs, like Sanctuary and Shield of Faith, but what matters is Bless. Bless does for combat what Guidance does out of combat, but it does it multiple times around. It's good enough that it defines the Cleric. A Cleric's default action in every encounter is to cast Bless, at least until the Cleric gains Spirit Guardians, and then it has the choice of one of those two for the rest of his career. So yes, the Cleric gets this role, mostly due to 2 spells. Now we come to Healer, and oh yes, though not with class features. It has no healing features, but it does have healing spells. As mentioned in my roles video, healing in 5e is about getting a downed or out colleague back into the fight. Replacing a large number of depleted hit points is secondary. It's nice, but not what's important. What's needed is a low-level, quick way to get a dying ally up. Healing Word will do nicely. Then to get rid of conditions, Lesser and Greater Restoration will handle that. And then a cheap way to revive a dead ally. That's Revivify. Have those and get them in a timely fashion, and that timeliness will come up when we get to half-casters, and the job of Healer is yours, and you're good at it. Anything less, and you're shaky. A Cleric has all of those at the right time, along with a bunch of other healing options, which can get either multiple allies up at the same time, or do some of that out-of-combat healing, which is nice. And at really high levels, it has big guns, like Mass Heal. Add in multiple resurrection spells in case you're a bit too slow for Revivify, and the Cleric goes far beyond the necessities of the role. Is it the best healer? That's a hard one. Before Tasha's, when it was the only full caster with Revivify, absolutely, yes, Revivify is that important. Now, I'm gonna give it the crown and see if anyone can take it away before I'm done. How about the Scout role? No invisibility, no teleports, and most importantly, no familiar. Besides the Clairvoyant spell, the Cleric really has nothing. Burglar? Doesn't have the proficiency. Face? No, the Cleric does have Persuasion on its list, but that's it, and Charisma screams out to be a dump stat for a Cleric. He's got a few spells that can help, mainly Guidance, but this ends up really subpar. Better to use that Guidance on most anyone else trying to be the Face. How about Scholar? Much like the face role, the Cleric has some intelligence skills on his list, but is missing important ones, and intelligence is vying with charisma to see which should be dumped harder. Use that Guidance on the Wizard or some other class we've yet to get to. And Utility Caster. For utility casting, the Cleric supplies illumination, ability to find objects and creatures, and helps with food and water, but it's missing many vital spells, including most involving transportation and anything for securing short and long rests. It just isn't enough, so no. But I'm not going to ignore what it does have, so I'll give it a partial, that a Cleric could team up with another class, or grab the Ritual Caster feat for Wizard, to fulfill this role. That's not really much, but it's something. Any other factors to think about when ranking the Cleric? Yeah. As you get to higher levels, the class offers less and less. This is due to an uninspiring spell list as the Cleric advances. More often than not, the best use for its 6th, 7th, and 8th level spell slots is upcasting Spirit Guardians. It's not terrible, but it's not exciting. The Cleric spell list is often considered the weakest of the full caster lists. I say no list is weak that contains Bless, Spiritual Weapon, and Spirit Guardians, but it is certainly a list with a lot of mediocre choices. Now to counter that, there's another factor, which is, to my mind, the Cleric is the most survivable class in the game, and this is overwhelmingly true at low levels, and that's a big deal. With okay hit points, decent armor, options due to spells, and no need to put itself into dangerous locations in order to be effective. If I was ranking the classes at levels 1 to 4, the Cleric would be on top. So, 2 combat roles, with one rated number 1, and remember, being really good at a role is more important than having lots of roles, places the Cleric high. The partial for Utility Caster takes the sting out of only having 2 real roles, and with its survivability, the Cleric is an A-tier class, but with the weakness at higher level, a lower A-tier. So he's fitting in under the Wizard, and I'll leave some space between. Next up is the last of the original 3, the Fighter. Now, is he a striker? Oh yeah. Extra attack, and the only one who gets multiple extra attacks. Fighting style, access to all weapons, action surge, plus fantastic synergy with damage-enhancing feats, and I'll be coming back to that. And nothing to hold him back. Tank? Yes. D10 hit die, only below the Barbarian, heavy armor and shields, second wind, and once again, serious synergy with feats. As a meat shield, he's one of the best. Controller? No, he's got nothing. Buffer? Nope, his only way of helping his allies is to stand in front of them. Healer, nope, no spells or features. Scout, he's got nothing. Burglar, no access to Thieves' Tool proficiency and nothing to enhance skills. Face, nope, only one Charisma skill, and Charisma is normally a dump stat. And again, nothing to enhance skills. Scholar, there really aren't a lot of smart fighters. Intelligence is normally a dump stat. He only has one intelligence skill, and again, nothing to enhance skills. And utility? He isn't a caster and doesn't do utility. So it looks like he's just got 2 roles, both in combat and nothing out of combat. Right? Not so quick. I mentioned feat synergy, but I'm not including feats in this ranking because feats aren't in classes, except in 2 cases, including this one. Fighters get more ASIs than any other class, one at 6th and 14, and that pretty much means feats. Any other class, except one, will lose something to take a feat, losing the ability to raise its stats. But for the fighter, it loses nothing. Taking 2 feats is part of the class. Unless your table doesn't include feats, I don't know any like that, but it's possible. In which case, the fighter straight up has the best stats since he can raise them 2 times more than normal. But I'm assuming feats are allowed. In which case, for the fighter, 2 feats are an integral part of the class and opens up so many options. Let's look at those out-of-combat roles I said the fighter can't fulfill. Scout? Well, the Magic Initiate feat and the Ritual Caster feat both offer Find Familiar, and with it, the fighter can take on that role. Burglar? The Skilled feat can provide Thieves' Tools, and the fighter has enough freedom in his design to allow for a decent dex. Face? Once again, the Skilled feat can supply the needed skills, like Persuasion and Deception. The Skill Expert feat supplies expertise, making up any deficiency the fighter might have in Charisma. He won't be the best face round, but he can do the job. What about Scholar? The same as for Face. 2 feats will do wonders. As for Utility Caster, no, he can't really manage it. But Ritual Caster can cover about half of what's needed for this job. So in a party that's missing this, the fighter can team up with another party member, such as a Cleric, and together they can take it on. Now clearly the fighter can't do all of these simultaneously, but they are all on the table for him. Now it's also an issue that the first extra ASI is at 6th level, and rolls should be taken before then. But it's not like he has to wait until 6. He could take the feat at 4th, which is still late, but better. Now I'm not going to put X's for all those roles due to the complications, but simply write that up as versatile. But what if he doesn't need to take on those jobs due to other party members handling them? Well, remember the feat synergy he has for the striker role? Well, it's more than synergy for the fighter since he's got those extra ASIs. Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master, or Crossbow Expert and Sharpshooter, can be considered part of the class without slowing raising his primary stat to 20. Likewise, for tanking, Sentinel or Heavy Armor Master are free to acquire, comparatively. Meaning, if he so chooses, the fighter can be the best striker in the game, or the best tank, though not both. Now, it's less clear for tank. Like with Cleric, I'm giving him the crown here, and we'll see if anyone can take it. So the fighter is solid in 2 combat jobs, and then has its choice of either being superb with one of those, or taking on one of multiple out-of-combat jobs, making the fighter an A-tier class, ahead of the Cleric. So the original 3 classes are all at the top, which isn't surprising when you think about it. Once upon a time, these were all there was, and they had to manage everything. So yeah, they're good. So what about the first additional class to the game those many years ago, then called Thief, and now called Rogue? Can the Rogue manage the striker role? Yes. Sneak Attack is the Rogue's defining feature, which is all about adding damage. Tank? No. A D8 and only light armor? No shields? That's poorer than just not being a tank. If he was required to stick to melee, I'd call him fragile. But range is an option, so he's fine, but no tank. Controller? No spells or features. Buffer? He's got nothing. Healer? Nope. Oh, this isn't good. For combat, only 1 role, and without extra attack or a fighting style, he's fine at that role, but not a competitor for number 1. Worse, Striker is the least impressive of the 5 combat roles, as everyone kinda does it. And if you have a rogue join a party to take the Striker role, you still need another character to take the tank role, and every tank can also be a Striker. Well, at least it will get better with out of combat. So, Scout. Okay, I know this is where some of you will shake your head, but no, Magic rules in 5e, and Magic takes this role. Yes, I know people are still playing the rogues like it's the 1980s, and rogues are good at scouting or spying, but only because the DM is being gentle. If a rogue can pull off the party scouting, then it's an absolute cakewalk for a wizard with a familiar. And if the game makes scouting or spying properly challenging for the wizard, then a rogue can't manage it, so no. But things turn around with Burglar. The rogue has Thieves' Tools proficiency and a high dex to use them. More, he's got the option to raise his intelligence, which is the second most likely attribute to use with Thieves' Tools, and can layer expertise on his proficiency, making the rogue the best burglar in the game. As for face, he's got the skills. He can afford to have a good charisma. He can't afford both a high charisma and high intelligence, but he's free to pick whichever one he needs. And he's good with skills. So yes, the rogue can be a good face. How about Scholar? Again, he's good with skills and can have a high intelligence if he lets his charisma slide, but most of the intelligence skills aren't on his list, so no. Well, actually, I'll get to this. Leaving utility caster and no casting, so no. But there's one more thing to consider. The rogue is the other class, besides the fighter, with an extra ASI, which I'm taking to mean he gets a feat. He only gets one extra instead of two, and doesn't get it until 10th level, but he still gets it, meaning if he wants his old job of scout back, he can take the ritual caster feat and get himself a familiar. Or he can take the skilled feat, pick up 3 of those intelligence skills, and take on the scholar role, which is my default choice for a rogue. Note, a rogue can't afford to take on the scholar role and the face role. Some stats need to be dumped. Once again, not getting this until later is an issue, so like the fighter, I'll give the rogue a bonus for being versatile, just not as versatile as the fighter. And if he doesn't want to increase his out-of-combat usefulness, he can make himself a bit better at striking. The rogue's out-of-combat rolls help a lot, but they're needed, or this class would drift toward the bottom. As a whole, it's decent, particularly due to his exceptional talents with locks and traps. So due to that, the rogue slips into B tier. But this is assuming your Dungeons & Dragons game has a lot of dungeons. If a campaign doesn't have lots of locks and traps, the rogue drops considerably. I'm not going to worry about the exact order the next 5 classes came in. They all came out within 3 years of each other in different supplements. I'm going next with Druid. The Druid's another full caster. What's its roles? Striker? No, it can use weapons, and the cantrip Shillelagh will help it hit, but there's not much to increase that, and cantrip damage doesn't cut it. Remember, I'm not counting burst damage here, but reliable, consistent damage. A tank. It's like the Cleric, except worse, perhaps much worse. D8 hit die and medium armor and shields, but he can't use metal armor. Depending on how your DM interprets that, do the studs in studded leather make it metal? And how kindly your DM is in inventing armor, this could be a little problem or mean your druid is stuck in padded armor forever. Whatever the case, it is a problem and means that cool magic armor the party finds in a dragon's horde is probably not for the druid. Now I'm talking about the class. Someone is bound to be thinking about the Moon Druid subclass, and yes, at low levels, the Moon Druid is a stellar tank, but Druid in general, no. The animals a base Druid can wild shape into are not going to make it a tank. How about controller? Actually, yes. Again, it's spells, not features. But the Druid has some decent control spells. Entangle, Spike Growth, Plant Growth, Sleet Storm, Wall of Fire, Cone of Cold, Transmute Rock, Wall of Stone, Firestorm, and more. Plus, Conjuring can end up doing some solid crowd control. The spell list fades compared to the wizards at higher levels, but Entangle and Spike Growth are a good beginning. He's not a top controller, but he gets the job. How about buffing? The Druid doesn't have much, less than the Cleric, and unlike the Cleric, it doesn't have Bless. Jump, Bark Skin, and Protection from Poison just don't do it. It also has Foresight, an amazing buff spell, but the Druid won't see that until 17th level. So that leaves us with Guidance, which is fantastic, Pass Without Trace, which is situational, but the situation will come up and it solves it, and Polymorph, which is great for quite a few levels in the middle of the game, though it's single target and requires concentration, so forget being a controller at those times. That's just not enough. Not without some way to buff the party in every battle. It's a nice add-on if your main party buffer is weak, but alone, no. Healer? Absolutely. Like the Cleric, it's all about spells, and it has the ones that count. Healing Word, Lesser and Greater Restoration, and Revivify. And this is the class that can compete with the Cleric. What extra does the Druid bring to the table? Goodberry, an extremely efficient first level spell. I should note that it's not clear that you can feed a Goodberry to an unconscious ally to wake him up. It might seem clear that you could, but the fact they specifically stated that for potions and did not for Goodberry leaves it up in the air, and if your DM rules against that, which is a legit position, then Goodberry loses much of its charm. The Druid also used to have Healing Spirit, but that was nerfed to the point that it barely deserves mention. So for the question of who among the very good healers is the best, it's Goodberry, if allowed to be fed, for the Druid, versus Aid, Mass Healing Word, Raise Dead, and Mass Heal for the Cleric. Goodberry is really good, but Aid is up there, and big number heals and alternative resurrections count, swinging it toward the Cleric. But it's close enough I'd call it a tie, except one more item. Revivify only came to the Druid through Tasha's optional expanded list, and while I expect most tables have adopted that, it isn't universal. If you're playing using PHB +1 book rules, then you're likely not to have Tasha's additional spells, and the Cleric is the easy winner. In the way most people play now, the Cleric and Druid are both great healers, and it's not worth considering which is better at it when choosing what a party needs. But if you are playing at a more restrictive table, the Druid is the lesser healer, so I'm letting the Cleric keep the crown. For Scout, pre-Tasha's, the Druid could wild shape and make a passable Scout. Post-Tasha's, he can call a familiar and make a good Scout. Burglar? Nope, lacks the proficiency. Face? Lacks the skills and probably dumped charisma. Scholar? It does have 3 of the skills on its list, though it has no features to help with the skills and probably dumped intelligence. Utility caster? Again, we are in exactly the same spot as the Cleric. The Druid is okay at finding things and keeping the party fed, but it is missing key utility spells, so I'll give it a partial. So, 2 in-combat rolls, 1 really good, and 1 good enough, plus 1 out-of-combat roll. Its twitchy armor doesn't help as much as medium armor and a shield normally do, making the Druid a middle-of-the-pack class. Call it B tier, above the Rogue, and below the Cleric. Next, it's the Ranger. Oh, the poor Ranger has had a rough time in 5e. Does the Ranger deserve all the derision it has received? Well, before we even get into its roles, we have our first problem. It's mad. That is, multiple attribute dependent. One of the 3 classes that are. Instead of the normal 1 primary attribute and a secondary, the Ranger has 2 primaries and a secondary. Kind of. Since it is a martial class, it has a primary of either strength or dex for its weapon attacks. But as a caster, it also has a primary stat of wisdom for its spell casting. And then as a martial, it has a secondary of con, so it has the hit points to survive in melee. Okay, I wanted to lay that all out here, so we've got it down where it doesn't matter before we come upon classes where it does. Yes, the Ranger is technically mad, and that will affect it greatly if built poorly, but it easily gets around the problem. A Ranger can choose non-attack spells, focusing on movement and self-buffing, where the casting stat doesn't matter, reducing wisdom from a primary to a secondary stat. As for con, well, a Ranger can be in melee, but it doesn't have to be, and most builds avoid it. So if he isn't on the front line, an average con is fine. So I'm deleting mad as a problem. How about its roles? Striker. Yes, it's got martial weapon proficiencies, a fighting style, extra attack, favored foe or the Hunter's Mark spell, and synergy with feats. Tank? No. The D10 hit die is nice, as is the medium armor and those shields, but no heavy armor, no second wind, and if he worries about his con, then mad is an issue. And while the new tireless feature is nice, it doesn't come in until 10th. So no, Rangers are sturdy, but not the guy you want as the lone person between the squishy wizard and the enemy. Controller? No. The Ranger has a few Druid control spells, Entangle and Spike Growth are the best, but there isn't much more, and as the Ranger is a half caster, everything comes on late and can't be cast often. He can't cast Spike Growth until 5th level. Buffer? He's got a few of the Druid's weaker buffs, but no guidance and no polymorph, and again, the Ranger is a half caster. Pass Without Trace is the only significant spell, and it comes on late. Healer? The Ranger has no healing features, only spells, including some key spells. But being a half-caster means he doesn't get them when he needs them, and doesn't have the spell slots to cast them often. He can't cast Lesser Restoration until 5th level instead of 3rd, or Revivify until 9th instead of 5th. Okay, party, if all of you could hold off from dying for 4 levels, I'd appreciate it. He can't use Greater Restoration until 17th level. Even Goodberry doesn't really work, since a Druid can toss an unused 1st level spell slot at it at the end of the day, but a Ranger isn't gonna have a spare spell slot at the end of the day. A half-caster can't work as a healer without something special added in, and the Ranger doesn't have anything. As a backup healer, to get the real healer back up if he falls, yes, absolutely, but not as the primary. But I'll give him a mark as a backup. Scout? Well, remember the Rogue? Well, sneaking doesn't work any better for the Ranger. At least he has a few spells to help him out, but not the ones that count. Burglar? No access to the Thieves' Tool proficiency. Face? No charisma skills. Scholar? No, but he's not as bad as you'd think. He's got 2 intelligence skills on his list, and the post-Tasha's Canny feature lets him use expertise on one. It's not enough, but most classes are worse. Utility caster? They clearly wanted the Ranger to be able to handle utility functions in the wild with features, but then they underpowered them. Extra forging, not becoming getting lost and speeding overland travel is kind of pathetic next to what spells can do, and the Ranger is way behind on spells to pull off this role. And you can see the problem with halfcasters generally, and the Ranger specifically, outside of striking. He's not terrible at most roles, but he's not good enough to actually fulfill them, which means someone else has to do it, at which point it doesn't matter that he isn't terrible. He'd be far better off if he was absolutely wretched as a scholar and with control, and was more fragile if he could then be actually good at something else. Instead, all he is a striker. One role. That's not much. So he should be the absolute best at it. Is he? Nope. But he is good at it. He can fulfill the role quite well, for what that's worth. So you can still make a playable character for a Ranger. One role, but at least he has no big drawbacks, and he can be the backup healer, which is something. So it's not a failed class. One role gets him into C tier, and currently into last place. So how about another halfcaster, the Paladin? Let's dive in. Striker. Yes, martial weapons, extra attack, fighting style, synergy with damage enhancing feats, plus divine smite, and multiple damage enhancing spells. He's got this one covered. Tank, D10 hit die, heavy armor, and shields. And it has the compelled duel spell, so we've finally got a tank with stickiness. Controller? No, nothing here. Buffer. As a halfcaster, this is hard to do with spells. The Paladin buffing spells are mostly ones from the Cleric list, although it does add Crusader's Mantle, which is solid. But like with the Cleric, level 1 is what matters, and it's actually better than the Cleric's, adding Heroism. And yes, Bless is here. And one of the fighting style options is Blessed Warrior, which supplies guidance. Is that enough with a fewer spell slots to cast Bless? Well, maybe not, but the Paladin has more. It has Aura of Protection at 6th level, and always on aura buffing allies' saves. From that point on, he never has to do anything else and is a good buffer. And then at 10, it adds an aura to add immunity to fright. So yes, the Paladin can do this. Now in most cases, he'll be pretty weak at it before level 6 because he's got other things to do with his spell slots, but if he wants it, he's got it. Healer. It looks like a replay of the Ranger. The Paladin has the spells needed for the job, but gets them later. And as I said, a halfcaster can't work as a healer without something special to add in. But here's the thing, the Paladin has something special. This is the first class with a healing feature, Lay on Hands, and it's better than any single target healing spell, and it's enough. The Paladin gets the healer role. 4 combat roles, and no other class will match it. For out of combat, Scout? No. Burglar? Nope. Face? Yeah, with persuasion and intimidation skills and a high charisma score. It's not spectacular, but it will do. Scholar? Nope. Utility caster? Nah, it has a few spells, but no. Well, this is nothing like the Ranger. It's got 5 roles, 4 in combat, and it seems like it could do these well. But numbers matter, and this is where Mad comes in. It might not have been a problem for the Ranger, but it is here, and there's no way out. The Paladin needs a high attack stat. It could be strength or dex, but I'll just refer to it as strength. But it needs a high charisma for spells, and more importantly, features. Aura of Protection is spectacular, but only if the Paladin has a high charisma. But a high charisma means that if you're using standard array or point buy, there's not enough left for strength, meaning he's got less chance to hit and does less damage. Put points into both and they're okay, but not top notch. And there's no points left for con, making him a weaker tank. And if Mad wasn't bad enough, the Paladin's damage uses spell slots, thus the same resource it needs for casting. So the potential is amazing, but unless you are rolling for stats and get really lucky, you can't fuel it. There's a reason why few people stick with Paladin. There's more Witch Knights, that's Paladin, Hexblade multiclass, than straight Paladins. With a Paladin you have a choice. Try and do it all and be mediocre at multiple things, or focus and give up half your jobs and what made the class special. Still, it can fulfill multiple jobs, or it can be really good at a couple, making this a solid B tier above the Druid. Next comes the Bard, who gets the award for the most altered class from its 1976 introduction as a weird chimera. How does it fare? Striker. No. People try to turn everything into a Gish. No, they shouldn't. Tank? No. A D8 hit die and some light armor means it needs to keep far away from the front line. It also makes it far more sturdy than wizards or sorcerers. Controller. Why yes, the Bard is packed with most of the best control spells in the game, starting at first level with Sleep, passing through Hypnotic Pattern, Slow, Synaptic Static, and Mass Suggestion up to Force Cage, and anything it doesn't already have, it can get with magical secrets. So, Wall of Force and Maze, not to mention Wish, are there for the taking. Due to magical secrets, the Bard has access to every spell in the game, giving him more options than the Wizard. It's only the Wizard's ability to prepare spells, instead of know them, that keeps the Wizard on top. Buffer. Starting with spells, the Bard has many of the same powerful ones the Wizard does. Enhanceability, Invisibility, Polymorph, Greater Invisibility, Seeming, and Foresight, with additions from other classes, such as Heroism. And at high levels, with Magical Secrets, he can add anything he wants if he's missing something, though he isn't missing much. And then it gets better with Bardic Inspiration, where the Bard can massively increase the odds that any important roll the party has to make succeeds. Going from playing in a party with a Bard to one without, all the characters seem much weaker, so much more likely to fail. Yes, the Bard can more than fulfill this role. He's the best at it. And note, since Bardic Inspiration is a bonus action without concentration, the Bard can act as the party buffer and controller simultaneously, one-upping the Wizard. Healer? Yes. It's funny, you'd expect the Cleric or Druid to have some healing features, but no. The full casting class with a healing feature is the Bard, the Song of Rest. It's not a huge deal, but it helps. The rest is by spells, with Cure Wounds, Aid, Lesser and Greater Restoration, Mass Healing Word, Raise Dead, and many others up to the 9th level Power Word Heal, and through Magical Secrets, anything else he wants. Now, he doesn't get Revivify, and while he can pick it up later with Magical Secrets, that knocks him out of the competition for Best Healer. Also, as he works with known spells, every healing spell he takes is one controller buffing spell he can't take. I prefer bards being secondary healers so that he can excel at everything else, but if a bard wants this job, he can take it. So far, impressive. And out of combat? Scout. No. Sure, he's got a lot of stealthy spells, but he doesn't have a familiar, and while he can grab one at 10th level with Magical Secrets, hell, he can grab a Griffin if he wants, that's too late. Burglar. Well, sorta. You see, there's only 2 classes that straight up get a proficiency with Thieves' Tools, so if anyone else is going to be able to do this, I've got to lower the bar. With Jack of all trades, the Bard is half proficient, and high dexes are the norm for a Bard. So he's not good, but if he absolutely needed to, he's your best bet without a rogue or a yet-to-be-named class nearby. Face. He's got the skills, he's got expertise to put in those skills, he's got the charisma, and he's even got spells to layer on if he wishes. Yes, once again, he's not just good, he's the best. How about Scholar? Bard should not try to do this, but yes, he can. He has access to all the scholarly skills, plus expertise, and Jack of all trades to fill in gaps. The problem is it needs intelligence, and that's a dump stat for a Bard, but he can get it high enough that expertise will make up the difference between him and a Wizard, making the Bard better at this than a Wizard. Now, if he wants, he can be the best, but it will cost him. To get his intelligence high enough, he'll have to lower Con, Wiz, or Dex. I would never suggest lowering Charisma on a Bard. It's 20 all the way. So, making him more fragile, but he'd still be sturdier than a Wizard or a Sorcerer, so while I do not recommend it, in the right kind of party that has the other jobs covered, the Bard can do this, and he can do it better than anybody else, at least without an addition that doesn't come from a class. And that brings us to Utility Caster, and it's another problem role. Only the Wizard is truly good at this, and besides the Wizard, only the Bard has enough of the needed spells on his spell list to do this. He's got Detecting and Identify spells, he's got Locating spells, he's got Movement and Communication spells, and most importantly, he's got Safe Rest spells. In particular, Leomund's Tiny Hut. And of course, Magical Secrets will get anything else. So yes, he can do this. The problem is he doesn't have the Wizard's ability to cast rituals that aren't prepared. A Bard has to know the spell, and knowing all the utility spells will leave him almost no room for control, buffing, or healing. But if he's again in a party where those roles are covered, then he can do this. So, 3 in combat and 4 out. And an easy-to-make optimized Bard will have 2 in combat with 1 better than anybody else can make, 1 out of combat, also better than anybody else, and 2 backups. When I started this, I knew what would come on top. The Wizard. Clearly. Except, in combat, the Wizard is only slightly better with control, while the Bard trounces him in buffing and healing, and the Bard is better at multitasking those. And out of combat, it's close, which gives the win to the Bard. Yeah, these 2 classes are fantastic, S tier, and the best of the best, but the Bard takes the top spot from the Wizard. Well, okay. Will our next do as well? It's another class introduced in the mid-1970s and has also been changed a lot over time. It's the Monk. No prologue, let's just do this. Striker. That's what he does. Punch things. We'll come back to this. Tank. No, D8 hit die doesn't do it, and monks can't wear armor or use shields. Their unarmored defense is equal to their dex plus wisdom. That's a 15 or 16 to start, and never better than a 20, and that 20 will be rough to get. Due to no armor, the monk is negatively synergized with feats and magic items, so no. Controller, no spells. Buffer, no spells or features. Healer, again nothing. Scout, if rogues and rangers can't do it, a monk sure can't. Burglar, no proficiency. Face, no charisma skills, plus charisma's a dump stat, and that's non-negotiable. Scholar, only 2 intelligence skills on his list. Monks have nothing to buff skills, and intelligence is a dump stat. Utility caster, no spells. Ooh, so once again, we've got a class with one and only one role. At least the ranger had a backup role. This isn't good. Absolutely nothing to do out of combat, and not much in. The striker is the least impressive combat role to have, so the monk needs to be really good at it. Just spectacular. Is it? Well, his weapon choices lack some of the big damage dealers, and he has to make some attacks unarmed. Okay, at least his unarmed attack die goes up. That's good. Of course, it goes up at a rate such that it doesn't equal a longsword until 11th level. No fighting style. Again, negative synergy with feats. Likewise with magic weapons. He's got nothing buffing his damage, meaning he's often hitting weaker than a bard. He does get extra attack, but only once. However, the monk gets martial arts, allowing a bonus action unarmed strike. Okay. Of course, anyone can do that. It's called 2-weapon fighting. The only thing the monk is getting is the ability to add his dex mod, which is a few points, so that's something. But then the monk also gets flurry of blows, allowing for another unarmed attack as part of the bonus action. Okay, another attack is good, except it uses ki, meaning it is restricted. Only twice between short rests at 2nd level, and that same resource fuels anything else the monk will ever do, so it might not even be that often. This is not good, and it's about to get worse. Remember Mad? We've got our 3rd Mad class, and our 2nd where it counts. The monk has Con as a secondary, needing a decent one to stay alive since he's a frontline marshal, and he's got 2 primaries. Dex for attacking and his AC, and Wisdom for his features and his AC. He must have all of that, and he can't get it. Not on point buy or standard array. Without 20s in both and a 16 in Con, he's feeble. And if he ever wants feats, yeah, as if he can afford to give up an ASI. And forget about ever trying to do anything clever with the other 3 stats. The monk has no points to spare. So part of being a striker is staying alive to actually strike, and his AC and hits aren't good enough for close combat. Luckily, he's got the abilities to either dodge as a bonus action or disengage as one. Great for staying alive, except forget the martial arts attack and flurry of blows then, and as both use up ki, forget flurry of blows later. If the monk had all the ki it wanted, and you used a generation system that maxed out his stats, he still wouldn't be a good striker. He's got nothing buffing him up, but he'd be an okay one. But he doesn't have all the ki he wants, and his stats are going to be lower, making him the worst striker of anyone claiming the role. In fact, he's little better than those who are not claiming the role. If he needs a limited resource to attempt the role, figure the wizard can use a limited resource and 2 more damage. No, I can't even give this role to the monk. I can call him a secondary striker, someone who's okay as long as all the roles are filled, the 6th member of a 5-person party. Now the monk ends up with no roles, making the ranger look pretty good, and we have ourselves a failed class. Coming in at the bottom. I sure hope its subclasses are amazing. Yeah. Well, that was depressing. Well, next we have a class that first popped up in 1985 and really joined the party in 3rd edition in 2000. It's the Barbarian, and you can guess how this one's gonna go. Striker. No question here. He's got all the weapons, extra attack, rage damage bonus, and reckless attack, and synergy with feats. Plus, brutal critical. Okay, that one's not great, but the rest is. He can do it. Tank. This is what a Barbarian is best at. A D12 hit die, the best in the game. No heavy armor, but he has his choice of unarmed defense or medium armor, and either way, he gets shields. So feats and magic armor and shields are an option. And on top of that, he gets resistance to non-magical weapon damage when raging. And yeah, that's great. In fact, we're now looking at a contender for best tank, provided he tries for it, picking up a shield and forgoing those reckless attacks. And at low levels, before a fighter can afford a suit of plate or start picking up extra feats, I'd give it to the Barbarian. But overall, I'm leaving it to the fighter. Those extra ASIs count for a lot, and rage is a limited resource. If you're just doing combat here and there, then the Barbarian is good. But on a dungeon crawl, with small battle after small battle, he'll run dry. But he's a solid 2nd. And for the rest, Controller, no. Buffer, no. Healer, no. Scout, no. Burglar, no. Face, well, he does have a charisma skill, but no. Scholar, extra, no. Utility caster, no. Having nothing for out of combat is unfortunate. The Barbarian only has 2 roles, but he does them well. So if you want a tank and striker, he'll do nicely. But there's one more factor. Barbarians are front-loaded. They've got a great capstone, but otherwise, between 8th and 20th, the class doesn't offer much. It got to the point that for a couple years, multiple levels of Battlemaster Fighter were just considered by many to be the default progression for a Barbarian. Even for those who don't normally multi-class, this is a case where they did. The Barbarian is like half a class that you finish up with something else. And sure, a Barbarian fighter is pretty good, but I'm just ranking Barbarian. So 2 rolls and little at high levels puts the Barbarian above the Ranger, but below the Rogue. Also with 3rd edition, we got the Sorcerer. Restating, I'm ranking the classes, not the classes with the subclasses or the potential of the subclasses, but the base class. This really matters with the Sorcerer, who's got some problems, which WotC noticed, so attempted to correct with subclasses and Tasha's. But that doesn't fix the problem, unless you play those subclasses. The class, including combined with older subclasses, still has the same problems. It's just now way more noticeable to anyone who missed it before. So, looking at the class, Striker, no. Remember the Wizard? Same thing. Tank, no. D6 and no armor, same as the Wizard, which also means fragile. Control, yes. This is what the Sorcerer is best at, which should be no surprise since it's all about spells and he's got many of the important Wizard control spells. Grease, Sleep, Web, Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Slow, Fireball, Ice Storm, Mass Suggestion. So yeah, the Sorcerer spell list is just the Wizard spell list, except less. A lot less. Looking for Wall of Force, Force Gauge, or Maze? Keep looking. And Sorcerer gets fewer of these spells. A lot fewer. A Sorcerer gets 15 spells at 20th level. A Wizard is into the 40s in a restrictive game. The Bard, also a known spellcaster, like the Sorcerer, gets 22, and the Sorcerer can't swap the way a Wizard can. So his control is, like a Wizard's, a massively nerfed Wizard's. Buffing? Yes, similar story. Same Wizard spell list, but less. Same issue as the Wizard with not being able to buff and control simultaneously because of concentration, but also now there's a build problem. He can't fit enough control and buffing spells onto his known spell list to do them both well. Halfway through the game, he's sitting at 11 spells, so he's got to choose a role and then just dabble in the other. He does get a bit of a boost due to Twin Spell, as he can take a powerful single target buff and put it on 2 allies, although I've never seen a game where 2 allies wanted to be polymorphed at the same moment in combat, but if it comes up, it's nice to be able to do it. Healing, no, same as the Wizard. Spy Scout, no. His massively reduced Wizard spell list doesn't include Find Familiar. Burglar, no, same as the Wizard. Face, hey, an area where the Sorcerer isn't just a nerfed Wizard. He gets the face skills, and will have the charisma to use them. He's even got a feature, Magical Guidance, to buff up his skill use. It's too pricey and limited in use, but in emergency, it's there, and the Sorcerer has spells to help. He won't have room to take them, but they're on his list. So yeah, he's okay with this. Lagging far behind the Bard and Rogue, but ahead of the Paladin. Scholar. Arcana and Religion are options for him, though that's it. And he's got Magical Guidance, but Intelligence is a dump stat. And with a guy this fragile, he can't ignore his Con, Dex, and Wiz. So in dire circumstances, he can give it a try, but consistently, no. Utility Caster. Well, it's like a Wizard, a really nerfed Wizard who had all the most important utility spells stripped away. No Lehman's Tiny Hut, no Rope Trick. He doesn't even have Unseen Servant, and he doesn't have Ritual Casting for the few utility spells he can take. So no. So 3 roles, except he can only really take one of the combat roles, and it is a negative that his way of fulfilling these roles are the same as another class, the Wizard, but so much worse. The Sorcerer is a class where the right subclass really makes a difference and moves him up in the ranking, but the wrong subclass leaves him dangling. And without that right subclass, the Sorcerer is playable and can do the jobs, but it's pretty lackluster, and he slides in just above the Ranger. Next, well, D&D 3.5 brought the Warlock into the fold. How does he do? Let's see, Striker with Eldritch Blast, plus Agonizing Blast, plus Hex, plus Darkness and Devil's Sight, plus Shadow of Moil? Absolutely. Not only is the Warlock a solid Striker, it's probably the easiest to make good. There's no complicated feats, no build you need to dwell on. A beginning player can make a successful Striker with a Warlock. Tank. With a D8 hit die and light armor, plus the option at 2nd level to have mage armor always active, the Warlock is one of the hardier full casters, but that's a long way from being a tank. Controller. He's got the spells, or at least some of them. It's not a great list, lacking some desirable spells, like walls, but he's got many of the better control spells. Darkness, Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Hunger of Hadar, Mass Suggestion, even Force Gauge. Holding this back is the very limited pack magic. Following WotC's suggestion of 6 combats a day and 2 short rests, a Warlock should be able to cast his big control spells as often as a Wizard, at least up until 5th level spells. But he can arrange things to use a lot of those spells in the big battle of the day. He's stuck at 2 spells for half his career, and a majority of games report they don't follow that suggestion. So with fewer short rests, the Warlock's ability to act as a controller really suffers. Now, if you have a table that averages more short rests, the Warlock could pull ahead in daily castings of important spells, but he's still limited on how much he can do in any single combat. And at higher levels, he only gets one known spell and only gets to cast it once a day, severely limiting his abilities. Now, slightly offsetting the disadvantage of pack magic are invocations. Attaching Repelling Blast and Grasp of Hadar onto his Eldritch Blast gives the Warlock a great deal of forced movement, and being able to cast Silent Illusion at will, if he takes Misty Visions, means he can block line of sight at any time. Meaning, yes, the Warlock can take on this role, but he's not great at it, and he falls further and further behind other controllers at high level. Buffer. He's got a few spells, but only a few, and as a Warlock, he's unlikely to know more than 1 or 2 and can't cast them often. Pact of the Talisman allows for little single-person buffing, none of which is enough. Healer. Nope, he doesn't get healing spells or features. Scout. With Pact of the Tome, he can get a familiar to be on par with a wizard. But if he takes Pact of the Chain, the Warlock has the ultimate drone. His familiar is intelligent, can become invisible, fly, and has thumbs. He can even choose to see through his familiar's eyes thousands of miles apart, and can call him back at any time. The Chain Lock is unmatched in scouting and spying. Burglar, no, he doesn't have the proficiency. Face? Well, Charisma is his primary stat, Deception and Intimidation are on his skill list, and the Invocation Beguiling Influence grants Deception and Persuasion, handy since he only gets 2 skills, meaning he can do the job. He's got some related spells, Cause Fear, Charm Person, Glibness, but they aren't exactly normal picks for the Warlock. With no feature to buff skills, he won't be outstanding, but he'll do. How about Scholar? This is a hard call. Only the Warlock has all 5 intelligence skills on his list, but he can only take 2, and as mentioned, the Warlock has no features to buff his skills. Worse, Int is a dump stat for the Warlock. He can't afford to put points into it. No, without some outside help, background, and feats and subclasses, he can't pull this off. And that brings us to Utility Caster. And he's got some spells, but not many. But what he does have is Pact of the Tome plus Book of Ancient Secrets, allowing him to cast any ritual spell in the game, provided the DM makes him available. This is much better than what the ritual feat provides, as he can not only have those needed wizard rituals, like Detect Magic, Comprehend Language, Tensor's Floating Disc, Rory's Telepathic Bond, Phantom Steed, and most importantly, Leomund's Tiny Hut, but he can add Cleric and Druid ones, like Purify Food and Drink, Animal Messenger, Silence, Waterwalk, and Commune with Nature. Invocations add being able to use the Sending spell, resulting in the Warlock being the second best utility caster in the game. However, there's a huge gap between first and second, but he can do it. So the Warlock ends up with 2 in combat and 3 out of combat rolls, which is pretty good, but he's only really good at 2 of those. You really want a class to excel at what it does, and the one area it does excel in precludes it from taking a different role. You can't have both a souped up familiar for scouting and take on utility caster, as those require different pack gifts. Now with Pact of the Tome, it can do both, but just not as well. Of course, the Warlock is known for being a dipping class, but I'm not giving it points for that. I am noting how restrictive the casting can be, and how the class has less to offer at higher levels. Still, 5 potential roles is pretty good, landing the Warlock above the Rogue. Leaving one more class, the newest addition, the Artificer. And this one's really awkward. Why? Because it has a different design philosophy to every other class. For every other class in the game, the class defines what a character does, and then the subclass refines that. But for the Artificer, the subclasses define what the character does, and the class is just some resources that it can draw upon. You don't play an Artificer, you play an Armorer, or a Battlesmith, or an Alchemist. There's more similarity between a Barbarian and a Fighter than between a Battlesmith and an Alchemist. And since those subclasses contain the defining properties, it is those that give the character its roles, more than the class. So it's not going to do great here. Really, the Artificer is a design mess with contradictions galore and whose quality is way more dependent on the game setting than any other class. The more magic items available, the weaker the Artificer. But let's do the best we can. Okay, Striker, no. Tank. We're in Cleric territory here. A D8, medium armor, shields. With a Homunculus Servant attacking using up a bonus action, the Artificer can even dodge. And he can give a minor plus to his AC with enhanced defense, at the cost of being less of a party buffer. It's close, and I know subclasses will take him well into this role, but without those, as a solo tank, it's a little low. And like the Cleric, I'll give him a nod as secondary. Controller, he's got a few spells, with Wall of Stone being the standout, but he doesn't have that many, and as a half caster, none beyond 5th level, and they come late. Buffer. We've been here before with half-casters. He's got some buffing spells, including some good ones, but they come late and he doesn't have the spell slots to cast them often like a cleric or bard or wizard. He does have guidance, which makes him more worthy of consideration, but no bless. So that's a firm no. But he's also got infusions, which can give a buff to an ally, but only 2 of those till 6 and 3 till 10th, which isn't a lot. If he gives his own armor a boost and makes the homunculus I mentioned a moment ago, he's done at low levels, so no buffing anyone. And most of his infusions can be replaced by a bit of cash. If a party has money, it can buy a majority of the magical items he can make. Remember, in fulfilling a role, a class is supposed to be good at it, not just able to do some stuff in it. Otherwise, I'd be declaring bards as strikers since they can do some damage. Healer. He's got the necessary spells, but again, he's a half-caster, and half-casters can't manage better than a backup healer without something special added on, and there's no lay on hands here. Scout? Arcane Eye comes on too late, and the homunculus can't manage most of the familiar's tricks, so I'd say no. Except, Replicate Magic Item can, depending on the reading, replicate a Spell Raw Tattoo. Something I expect to be errated out of existence, but for now, it probably can. And a Spell Raw Tattoo allows for 1 casting of a first level spell. Now, while generally this allows for any first level spell, that doesn't mean you can get any with Replicate Item. It isn't clear, and limiting the spells to ones the Artificer knows is common. But with a permissive DM, Find Familiar could be an option. So, in this convoluted way, the Artificer may have access to Find Familiar and thus this role. I wouldn't allow it, but the Artificer needs some help, so for this ranking, I'll let it by. Burglar. Hey, what do you know? A role the Artificer can clearly take on. He's got the tool proficiency and can have a decent dex, if not outstanding. And his good intelligence might help. Tool expertise and flash of genius come along a bit late, but they are a buff. Plus, the Artificer has guidance, so he'll make a reasonable burglar. Face. No, lacks the skills and charisma as a dump stat. Scholar. He's got 4 of the 5 skills on his list, though he can only take 2, and he'll have the intelligence. Add in guidance and flash of genius, and he's not good at this, but good enough I'll give it to him. Utility caster. His list isn't bad, a combo of cleric and wizard utility spells. He's missing a lot, including transport and no tiny hut, but he has rope trick and Mordenkainen's private sanctum. Again, being a half-caster hurts him badly, with spells coming on too late. But I don't think he's much worse than the cleric, so like the cleric, I'll give him a mark for partial. Which sums up the Artificer as a partial, unfinished class. A bunch of partials and secondaries is not as good as a single roll. 5e does not reward being mediocre or less, as another party member will come in and do it right. And the roles it can take, it doesn't shine with it. Having absolutely no combat role makes the Artificer the second failed class. Since it does have some out-of-combat functions and those secondaries, it does beat the Monk, coming in at 12th. And that's it. That's my ranking. Bard, Wizard, Fighter, Cleric, Paladin, Druid, Warlock, Rogue, Barbarian, Sorcerer, Ranger, Artificer, Monk. But of course, a better class is only a better class if it does what you need it to do. It's always best to compare them by looking at what it is you need and then which class does it and does it well. And that's it for now. Don't forget that liking and subscribing thing, and time to sit back and relax with a little Irish whiskey.